When the road feels long and hope seems far away, listen through the longing, there's light to guide your day.
Voices of the faithful,
Calling clear and true,
stories of His goodness.
Jesus shining through.
Voices of the faithful,
Come and hear the
sound. Faithful hearts are singing.
His love is all around.
Voices of the faithful.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Voices of the Faithful. Our mission is to bring you a new, uplifting and empowering message each week to further your journey with God. This week, we feature the late, great Christian author, Florence Littauer.
As I was coming down here this morning to come into the room, Marita said to me, it's right around the corner. So I came around the corner and I started to go into the first room. And as I did, Marita said, no, that's not the right room. That's the NCAA. And I realized I've never been athletic. And definitely I was not going to go and give a speech to the basketball people, accepting that I do have a speech in my heart. And it's basically my grief over the death of the Lakers. So I thought maybe I could go in there and give them a talk. Well, then she said, no, it's around the next corner. And so I came down and came around this corner. And as I did, a group of people in athletic wear were running all around me. And I looked at them and I thought, I've never seen people so eager to get to a Christian speaker as this group. And Marita said, no, they're not going to hear you. She said, they're going to climb Pikes Peak. Now, I'd never thought of climbing Pikes Peak. And I thought back to my days in college when I took sports. And I didn't want to take sports because I had no ability whatsoever. But I remember that time when I had to take soccer. Now, for any of you that know me, you know for me to be playing soccer would be probably the last thing you could possibly imagine. And I almost flunked it because I refused to hit that muddy ball off the top of my head and ruin my hair. So as I've come here this morning, I've already passed by the basketball people. I've gone through those who were climbing Pikes Peak, and I'm here with you. Now, I hope what I have to say today is more appropriate for me than what I would have done in either of those other situations. Now, in the last few weeks, we have been inundated with visions, with typed print, with television, with all kinds of reports on the death of Ronald Reagan. I estimated that I have listened to approximately 30 hours of material on Ronald Reagan. I never set out to do that. I don't think any of us do say, I'd like to sit down and study one person for 30 hours on television. But to me, I was fascinated. I was not just fascinated with who he was and what he did, but I was fascinated about what people said about him. And as I listened to the comments, people that didn't even like him, such as Ted Kennedy, for example, even really got into the depths and came out with a good statement about Ronald Reagan. Now, as I listened to this and all the comments that I heard, I thought, I'm going to organize these ideas into points. What are the things that most people are saying about him? And as I was thinking of doing this to share with you today, it came to me, if I were the one in the casket, what would they say about me? I began to think about that. What would they say about me? What would they say about you? I thought back to my Uncle Donald's funeral. Uncle Donald was one of those people that meant well. He tried hard. He tried to be the kind of father he should have been, but he never quite made it. He tried to be the kind of producer that he should have been, but he never quite made that. Uncle Donald just quite didn't make it. And because he didn't make it well, he was angry at the world. He was angry at everybody. And I remember Uncle Donald, who as a young man had been very handsome, and I'd even had a crush on him. But as he got older, he got more and more snarly. And at his funeral, Since he never went to church, they didn't have a pastor. So they hired someone to come in and say a few good words over Uncle Donald. And that pastor met with the family, and as we stood backstage, the man said, "Tell me some good things I could say about Uncle Donald." There was a hush in the room. No one could think of anything. Finally, his oldest son spoke up, and he said, well, towards the end, when he got angry, he stayed mad a little less than he did before. Now, I thought, what would they say about me? What would they say about you? Then I thought about my friend Kitty. She was a beautiful lady. She was very low-key, very helpful. She would come to my Bible studies. She was the only person that would come early to help me set up the chairs in my home and stay late to do the dishes of what everybody had eaten. Kitty was a helpful person. She had a great spirit of the Lord within her, and when you looked at her, you saw that radiance about her. I went to Kitty's funeral. The pastor gave a generic sermon. He read it out of a book. He had some prayers, and he called her the dear beloved. He never mentioned her name. He never said a personal thing about her. And I came home so upset, and I said to my husband, she's the most wonderful person I've ever met. And that man couldn't think of a thing to say about her. And then again I thought, what are they going to say about me? As my family, we all have a sense of humor, and we sat around the table, and I was so upset over the fact that Kitty was not in any way lifted up. Nothing about what she had done in life was shared, that I began to plan my funeral. Now I said, now this is what I want, and I began to tell my children. I began to tell them, and of course they added things to it. So pretty soon, my funeral was going to take place, and obviously it has not taken place, you've noticed. And so it was going to take place in the Crystal Cathedral. And I was going to be in a silver casket with a bow on top. I was going to be laid out with the casket open because I was going to be in somewhat of an angel costume. Now we added to this. We got the fabric it was going to be made out of. I wanted it filmy. Now, if you've been to the Crystal Cathedral, you know that way up in the ceiling, way, 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 way up, they have guy wires where the angels at Christmas float around. Real human angels float around up in chiffon gowns. And the gowns just billow as they just go wafting through the top of the cathedral. I thought, that's it. I'm going to have chiffon. It's going to be chiffon so that I will waft as I go around. And then I want to have I think maybe a tinsel halo would be good, so that I have that look of an angel. Marita came up with it, maybe a magic wand with a star at the end would add a touch as people looked into the casket. And so we planned all this. And then my husband, who liked to sing, he decided that what he would do is he would have me there in the casket, laid out in my angel costume, with the guy wires attached to the back, as the angels have. And then he was going to sing this song, which probably none of you have ever heard of. Johnny might hear it, and I doubt that you've ever sung this. I'll ask you. Up the river St. Lawrence, they're all hollering Florence. You know that? It goes, I lost my love on one of those 1,000 islands, and I have no idea where she's gone. But I'm singing, up the river St. Lawrence, they're all hollering Florence. Oh, where have you gone? And at the end of that, Fred was then going to give an evangelistic message on we know where Florence has gone, because you see, at that point, I would come out on the wires, out of the casket, and I would go out through the big side windows there, with my chiffon billowing, my little wand in my hand, and my tinsel halo. And as I would go out and Fred was singing, oh, where have you gone? He would then turn to the audience and say, we know where she's gone. And then he was going to give an evangelistic message with an altar call. And we knew that we'd get so many people coming up who would be heartbroken over my leaving in such a way, and would come up and kneel around the coffin, and we'd have a huge revival. Now, isn't that a good idea? We still joke about it. What?
So don't forget the pre-autographed books.
Oh, that's right. I'd forgotten one of the parts that my husband came up with. He said, what we'll do if we know you're dying. Now, I see you don't always know. But if you know you're dying, he said, what we'll do is you will pre-autograph some of your books. As many as you have the strength to do. And then we will have a book break in the middle of the funeral. And as we have this, people come out, and he said, we can double the price because it will be the last books you're ever going to sign. Now, when you think of this, you see, even thinking of funerals can be fun. Now, as I watched all the people talking about Reagan, it kept coming through my mind, what are they going to say about us? What are they going to say about me? Now, as I thought back about that, I wondered, what are the things in life that you and I do that people can take in your funeral service and talk about you? Because you see, every day you live, you are writing one more chapter in your own eulogy. And I thought about that, about me. Now, as I did that, I wrote down some of the things about Reagan that were consistent to see if I had those characteristics. I've given you a paper today with the 7 things that I found were the most talked about during that time. And I thought what it might be nice for you to do is to use this as a little report card to yourself and see, how do you do? Are you an A, a B, a C? Or are you like me in soccer? You barely made it with a D. How do you rank? What are people going to say about you? In Scripture, in 1 Kings 12:7, it says in there that in order to be a good king, good ruler, good president, that you need to speak kindly to all, to answer all who ask you, and to have the attitude of a servant. And as I went through listening and reading about Reagan, I tested him with that. And people said over and over again, soft-spoken, never gave harsh words, spoke kindly to all, answered all who asked him, had that attitude of a servant. And I thought, if he could do it, shouldn't we be able to do it too? So as I put together the different comments that people made, these are all principles that people said about him that I asked myself about me, and I'd like you to do the same thing. The first one, the very first one, is his smile of optimism. Would your children say that you have a smile of optimism? Would your children say, my mother and my father are always positive? They're always uplifting. No matter what I do, they encourage me. If I make mistakes, they say, next time will be better. Is that what your children would say about you? Well, I read what they said about him, and here are some of the comments that they made about Reagan along this idea. They said that he had a magnetic personality and that he had a contagious optimism, that if you were just with him, you felt better about yourself than you felt before, that he gave America a transfusion of his own optimism. Thought what a beautiful figure of speech, that here was Reagan with a large needle, and he was injecting us, the American people, with a transfusion of optimism. As we had come from the time of malaise, national malaise, we moved into good morning, America. We're going to make it. Other things he said were that the best is yet to come. What a good statement. The best is yet to come. And when he took over, things were not good. And there was the hostage crisis. And he had many problems. And he said the best is yet to come. Governor Pataki, in giving a eulogy for him, and realized somebody will give a eulogy for you. Someone had to give a eulogy to Uncle Donald. Someone gave a blank eulogy to my friend Kitty. Governor Pataki said this: the sun has set on a remarkable life, a man of unwavering principle, whose sense of hope and optimism and opportunity appealed to the best in American life. Would they say that about me? When somebody asked him once to define optimism, Reagan didn't do many definitions. He didn't count on deep thoughts. He counted on stories. He was a storyteller. And those of you that are speakers, pastors, teachers, you have to realize that the people don't always get the principle, but they will remember the personality. They'll remember the story. And he was a master at that, a master at it. And so as he was asked, what is optimism? He said, let me tell you a story. He always had a story. Didn't always fit, but he said it anyway. And he said, there was this boy, and he came out of his house in the morning, and his father had delivered to the front lawn a whole truckload of manure. Now, he said this manure was going to be spread around on the gardens and on the lawn. The boy didn't know what it was, and he came over and he looked at it, and he realized this was manure. So he went and got a shovel, and he began to shovel into this big pile. And someone came along and said to him, why are you shoveling that manure? And he said, with this big a pile, there's sure to be a pony in here somewhere. Now, that was one of his stories. And you see, that to him was optimism. There's got to be a pony in there somewhere. He didn't hold any grudges, and it's interesting that he made friends out of enemies. People couldn't dislike him. Nobody could really hate him. You couldn't get that kind of a feeling because he was so excited and so optimistic himself. Some of the covers that have come out in the last week, the one on Time, he's got the optimistic smile, that smile of optimism. The one in Newsweek, exactly the same picture. Isn't that amazing? That by coincidence, they both had the same picture. People magazine there, always with a smile, always with the optimism, always uplifting other people. Is that what people say about you? Do they say, oh, I love to be with her? Every time you're with her, you come away and you just feel better because you've been with her. Is that what people say about you? The second point is the sense of humor. And everybody talked about this, that he had such a good sense of humor, that he could always make light out of difficult situations. And some of the things that they said about him, they asked him, and this was told by ex-President Bush, this story. He said that one day Bush was meeting with Bishop Tutu. And somebody came along afterwards and said to him, how did you get along with Tutu? And he said, so-so. He had that sense of humor that came whenever he needed it, that it was just part of him that was in there. Do you have a sense of humor in touchy situations? Give yourself an A if you could have said that. But you see, as we think about some of the things he did, he just had a light touch to difficult situations. When he was shot, if you remember, he said as they were carrying him into the operating room, I hope the surgeon is a Republican. You see, he had a sense of humor even at a point when some people thought at that point he would die. Peggy Noonan was one of his speechwriters, and Peggy talked about him many times in his last 10 years of demise that we have all been aware of, that Peggy said, I didn't have much trouble writing speeches for him. She said, what I would do, and those of you that write sermons, write other things, think of this, just what I would do is I would write what he had to say. I'd write the points, and I'd put them in, so that when he looked at the teleprompter, here was all the information of what he had to say. And she said, I would give him a little bulk of serious things he had to talk about. And then she said there'd be a space, and I would just have on the teleprompter, tell story here. And she said he'd be serious through what he had to be, and then he'd see that. And she said every time he'd see that, he'd smile. That Irish twinkle of the eye, and he would tell a story. And the people loved the stories. She said it wasn't hard to write for him. Just let him fill in the blanks with whatever stories that he wanted. Brian Mulroney, the former premier in Canada, gave an eloquent message, probably the most eloquent of all, and with his accent and his finesse. And he talked about Reagan, and he said his success was due to his personal qualities that endeared him to the people. Personal qualities. Nobody said throughout the time he had brilliant thoughts of great things to do, but they all said he had personal qualities that warmed you to him, that drew you to him, that you wanted to be like that. And he said the things that he had that I appreciated the most was his grace, his good sense of humor, and his thoughtfulness to other people. And then Mulrooney told a story. He said, Reagan and I were standing in a hotel lobby. We were waiting for our wives to come back from shopping. They'd been out together buying clothes. And he said, we were waiting for them when the taxi drove up, and out stepped Nancy and Mulrooney's wife, and they walked in, and as they were walking in, Mulrooney said, Reagan looked over at me and he said, for two Irish boys, we sure married above our class. Now, he could just see in the dignity of his wife and Mrs. Mulrooney that there was something above average there, and he was grateful he was part of it. That at the end, he used a quote from the poet Yeats, who said this about associates that he had. He said, my glory was that I had such friends. Do you have such friends? Do you have friends that just like to be with you, that want to be there, that feel your warmth, that love your humor? Do you have friends like that? And when people have been with you, do they go home and say, I feel so much better that I've been with her? Third thing is the style. Not just style, not just how he dressed, but the sense of style that he had about it. In one of the LA Times articles about him, it said, Reagan had style with substance. That's what I'd like. I'd like to have style with substance. Many people just put clothes on. Reagan never just put something on. He dressed right. When he would sit in the Oval Office, he would always have on a suit jacket and a tie. He always would have that, and people would say to him, you don't need to dress up. Jimmy Carter just wore sweaters. You don't need to dress up. And he said, no, I look at this not as a job. I don't come to work as a job. I look at it as a role that I must play for the American people. I dress up. He never was seen, even when he was in casual clothes, anything that didn't fit him right, that didn't look right, that didn't fit the situation. Style with substance. That's what we want. We don't need to be in the most expensive clothes there are, but we need to look good. We need to look as if we spent a little time in getting ourselves put together. Marita and I have an expression. We sometimes see people in airports and we say, she looks like an unmade bed. There are people who look like that. Think of one for a moment. You probably have a friend like that. I mean, you know that they probably have something better at home, but they didn't bother to put it on today. Look like an unmade bed. Substance. People said that he did for TV what Franklin Roosevelt did for the radio. He became the person who knew not just how to talk, but how to talk so that whatever he said, it came right to you. So that when he said it, you didn't just see a generality, but you knew he cared about you. He looked at you. He talked to you. And on television, when he was looking at nothing but cameras, no audience at all, he would look there and he said, I pretended that that camera was a face, and I talked right to it. When you're speaking up front, do you just give a speech, or do you talk to the people? There is a difference. Governor DuPont said that he had a feeling for ceremonial things, for drama, and he loved the glory of the military. He liked those things. He liked things that had style with substance. One of his speechwriters, Peter Robinson, and I heard him say this on television, he had a total late-night speech on how he wrote for Reagan. And I sat up and listened to that. I can't believe the hours I spent on listening and learning about him, what made him special. And then asked myself, what will they say about you? Peter Robinson said that way back in the 40s that Reagan spoke for the General Electric Company. And as he spoke for them, he wrote many very brilliant, wonderful messages, and he wrote them all himself. And then as he went on into politics, he would write about half of them himself until he got to the White House, and then they told him, you don't need to write any of these things anymore. But one of the things this man said was, we went back to his original speeches that he did for General Electric, and we read them, and we found he had brilliant statements. He had great quotes in there. And so we took things out of his former speeches, put them into his up-to-date messages, and he would come along and he'd look at it and say, oh, I remember I said that once before. He remembered what he'd said. And as they wrote down his messages, he was able to give them with style because they were really part of him. Senator John Danforth said, there was something about Reagan that made you want to please him. People want to please you. Do your children work to please you? Not because you made them, but because they want to do that. How would you rate on that? The next is sensitivity. He had a sensitivity to people that he was able to walk into a room, just get a look at the people there, get a sense of who they were and what they wanted, and he was able to custom tailor his message to that. As Marita and I teach what we call our class, Christian leaders, authors, speakers, seminars, as we train people how to put together a message, what to do with it, and how to stand up front and how to have sensitivity to people, as we do that, we find so many people just think you give a speech. You don't just give a speech, that you want to talk to the people. You want to be sensitive to what are their needs today. It's not very hard to see where America's needs are today. If you just read the daily paper or look at the early morning television news, you can see how we're all thinking today. There's a national fear. When President Roosevelt went in, and I was a child, and he said, all we have to fear is fear itself. And he told us that as we went through the time of the Depression. Well, what is on people's hearts today? Fear. Fear of what's going to happen. Are we going to get blown up tomorrow? Fear. When we know how the people are thinking, we have answers that we can get, that the Lord will meet our needs, that we don't need to quake in fear. We have answers, and people are looking for answers. Are you sensitive to what these people need? When you talk and share with them, do you think of this? Do you know that? One of the statements one person made about him was that Reagan was able to bring the enemies out of their dens and turn them into friends. What an art that is. How amazing. His protocol chief, name was Lucky Roosevelt. I don't know if she had any relationship to the other ones, but she said that before he went out to greet a group of people socially, think of some of your social situations, that before he would go out, he would ask her, give me the list of all the people that are out there and tell me something personal I should know about these different people. And she would do that. She'd write it down. She said he was a quick study. He would look this over and she'd say, now, Ambassador so-and-so, his wife, is in the hospital. And, oh, all right. And she'd tell him different things so that when he went out with the group and he could meet them, he'd say, how's your wife doing? He had an amazing way to be sensitive to the needs of the people. As the ambassador to Ireland said, Reagan has a compassion. When you look at him, you see that he has a big shoulder that you could cry upon. Now, I found myself, even though I never really wanted to have a big shoulder for people to cry upon, I found out that if we have compassion, and we look at the people as if I understand, that people will look at you as having a big shoulder to cry upon. When I was first speaking, my husband said to me one day, do you realize, in conversation, do you realize that when you are talking, that you're not learning anything? He said, you already know what you're saying, so you're not learning anything. He said, it's time for you to learn to listen to the people. Find out what their needs are. Ask them questions. Not only did he instruct me to do that, and I was willing because I knew I had to. I knew that my idea of having a conversation with someone was to go up to that person and look and see that they needed to be cheered up. Do you need to be cheered up? All right, see, people need to be cheered up. So I thought that I was anointed by the Lord to go out and cheer people up. And so I would just go and cheer you up, and I'd talk to you and make you laugh and make you happy. And Fred said to me, maybe they'd like to tell you what's wrong with them. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. So he put me on a training program. And this training program was that when I'd be talking with someone, and I've got this person right over here in the corner, and I'm talking away to this person, that he would come up beside me and say, And what's your new friend's name? And what does she do? Well, you see, this was a shock to me because I never asked your name. See, I was too busy entertaining you. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know where you came from. I didn't know what your needs were. I didn't know what you did because I was busy entertaining you. So it got after a while so that if I was standing talking to this lady and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Fred approaching across the room, I'd grab it. What's your name, honey? Name, quick, name. Quick, name. See, I had to learn because it wasn't my nature to do that. I had to learn. Are you sensitive to the needs of the people? Or are you just entertaining them? Or just teaching them? Or just preaching to them? Do you care about their needs and are you sensitive to their needs? The next one, simplicity of speech. As I was looking at the different newspapers and saw the different pictures, I saw here, this is when he was over in France at the tombs and the graves of some of the Americans. And the headline says, "A master weaver of words and images." He was a master weaver of words. How do you do with words? When I coach someone in speaking, I have them listen to one of their messages. And when and ask them, listen and see when you repeat a certain word. And when you do that, it's amazing. You'll hear yourself say nice and good about 50 times in a speech. It was nice. They were good. Good people, nice people. Good people, nice things happen. And there's no variety, no vocabulary, nothing exciting about what you're saying. And that's one way to test out and see, are you a boring speaker? Of course, the first thing is to see whether the people are sleeping or not. I don't know if you noticed Hillary sleeping during some of the funeral, but it would be better that you not sleep through things. But you see, if you're not sure whether you're interesting or boring, it might be good while you're speaking to just notice. And if someone nods off before you, maybe you haven't really got an exciting point. Maybe there's nothing there that they're grabbing. And yet here he was, by nature, a master weaver of words and of images. And then another article in the LA Times said, Reagan had a gift of golden delivery. Golden delivery. Oh, wouldn't you like that said about you? Wouldn't you love it that after you give a sermon or a lesson, somebody come up and say, you have a golden delivery? Now, I've never had anybody say that. People have said you're like a silver box, but I had a golden delivery. How exciting to have a golden delivery. At one point, someone said to Reagan, Thomas Jefferson said that the presidency is a splendid misery. Do you agree? And Reagan said, he did his little pause, his little tip of the head, and he said, let's keep it just simply splendid. Not a splendid misery, simply splendid. He always wanted it to be splendid. He wanted it to be above average. Isn't that what we want? He was able to take confusing problems, make them simple. And he said, if you want to be a good speaker, you state your principle, you stick with it, and you go for it. And when you do, people will believe in you. Simplicity of speech, sincerity of heart. When Reagan spoke, people believed in him. They believed what he said. He was someone who answered all who asked him, answered them nice and carefully and pleasant. He answered them well, and he had the attitude of a servant. And his sincerity was one that caused 100,000 people to file by his casket, that caused people to come and stand there. One man was asked on television, I saw them ask him, he was one of the bystanders, and he was on his way into the rotunda to see the casket that was covered with a flag. You couldn't see the president at all. And he said, why would you spend 8 hours standing in line to see the president that you never met? And the man said to him, he gave us 8 years of his time, so it's very little that I give him 8 hours of mine. You see, people believed in him. They believed in him and his sincerity. Margaret Thatcher said this. She said, leaders have unshakable convictions. Unshakable convictions. She said he knew his mind. He had firm principles, and he went for it. She said he talked to TV just as he were talking just to you. He was believable. As we look today at ourselves and ask these questions, how do we fit with the praises that were given to him? How do we feel about that? Would you give yourself an A, a B, a C? And then in sincerity of belief, do people believe in you? When you talk, do they know that what you're saying is true? This is one of the things that always amazes me when I have people that have come and spent 3 days at our class seminar, and at the end of that time, they'll say to me, "You're really real." Now see, I never think of that I'm not real, because, as they say, you're the same on the stage as you are off the stage, and that's the way it should be. Are we sincere and believable? And lastly, the Spirit of the Lord within us. Was Reagan a Christian? His mother read him Bible stories when he was young, as we might have read fairy tales. She read Bible stories to him. She prayed with him, and she gave him the excitement of knowing the Lord in a personal way. At the funeral that was held at night, or as the sun was setting in California, at that time, the graveside ceremony, that at that point, his son Michael said this. His adopted son, his marriage with Jane Wyman, the son still with him, the son still positive, and he said this. He said, "What I will remember forever is that my life was changed by my father. His determination, his perseverance came from his deep relationship with the Lord Jesus. He pointed me to God." Will your children say that about you? I listened to that. I was amazed, because I didn't really know that that son had that kind of a spirit and a feeling. And yet he's been on talk shows for the last 2 weeks, and he's been sharing his Christian faith and testimony. I got it from my father. His persistence, his determination, and his relationship with the Lord Jesus. Dan Quayle said about him, he was down to earth. He had a faith that showed through, a faith that showed through. As I thought of my husband, I realized my husband had a faith that shone, a faith that shone through. And when we would get onto airplanes, my husband would always be happy. He would smile, he would whistle. And as we'd get on, many times the stewardess would say, "How come you're so happy?" And he'd say, "If you want to know, come and see me when we get settled." And I remember one day, just one in many examples, of a day when the female flight attendant came over and she said to him, "Will you tell me now why you're so happy?" And as my husband began to share his faith with her, she dropped to her knees in the aisle of American Airlines, grabbed onto my husband's arm, and she said to him, "That's what I need. I need Jesus." And I remember that because, you see, my husband had that faith that showed to other people. People could see it. And that's the way they said with Reagan. Now, as this funeral took place, and we saw all the ex-presidents there with their heads bowed, we realized the sincerity of the belief in the Lord Jesus. Reverend John Danforth said, he's now the appointed ambassador of the UN. He said, what he asked of America, he first asked of himself. He was shining through the light, and he was shining the light on others, not on himself. I have a sister-in-law who married my brother, top radio personality in Dallas, and I asked her, what's the secret of you getting along with him? Because he was not always easy to get along with. And she said, it's really quite easy. I just hold the spotlight. I thought, that's great. How many of us, wives and husbands, are holding the spotlight for our mate? I just hold the spotlight. As the time at the funeral service ended, that graveside service, and the sun was beginning to set in the west, the commentators told us that years ago, that Reagan and Nancy had figured out how they wanted to end his day of funerals. And they had it planned that they would have that service out there on the back lawn of the Reagan Library, that it would be looking out to the Pacific Ocean as the sun would begin to set. Nancy hadn't even timed to the minute. And so as the service ended, 3 children speaking, and she followed the casket out to the back to where the tomb would be. And as she did that, they took the flag off of the casket, they folded it up in little pieces till it was the size of just a point, and they handed it to Nancy. And if you were watching, I don't know how you could keep from crying as Nancy reached out, took the flag from the casket, and held it to her. And as she leaned down and kissed the casket, the sun sank in the west. Reagan had always said, "I want to be like a shining city on top of a hill." The whole group became a shining city on the top of the hill. And as that sun set down, as he had said, "I'm heading into a journey to the sunset of my life." And as the sun set, it was as if the old cowboy movies that had been filmed right on that hill, right on that hilltop, it was as if the old cowboy movies ended. Because you remember how they ended? The hero always headed off into the sunset. Reagan has done his last ride to the sunset, but there's much for us to learn. People said great things about him, and we're here today as a group of Christian leaders, and we want to ask ourselves, on all these points I've given you, how do you rate? How do you do? What do people say about you? Because you see, today, as we're here in these days together, our aim is not how much information I can gather, but how much I can share with others. How much of me will reach someone else? Is there enough compassion to let people cry on my shoulder? Is there enough love to give to people who are sad and brokenhearted today, even in leadership? So as we know, they said things about Reagan. They said things about my Uncle Donald. They said things, but not about Kitty. They just said things. So as we finish our time this morning, ask yourself, what are they going to say about us? Thank you.
We'd like to thank our production team at Sonic Motion Media, who provides us with all of our audio, video, and music production support. If you have an audio or video production need, or perhaps need some custom music, please visit sonicmotionmedia.com. We'd also like to thank today's sponsor, JW Puzzle Books. They have a fun and wonderful word puzzle book called The Word of God Word Search that you can order today at puzzles.voicesofthefaithful.com. That's puzzles.voicesofthefaithful.com. Thank you for joining us, and please plan to join us again every Thursday for another inspiring message from Voices of the Faithful.